So there's a part of walking by faith that just does not get talked about nearly enough in Christian circles. And that part is the part where you feel like you're losing your freaking mind because you are. You see, faith isn't something that you add to your existing life. You see, we all come to faith from a natural worldview, or you could call it a biological worldview if you want. What that means is that what you see, what you smell, what you can taste, what you can touch, what you can reason based on your own personal experiences, the things that you've learned in your life, this is the basis for how you think about and understand your world. In fact, you could even call this your reality. And what happens is oftentimes people come to faith and they try to add faith to that worldview, to that reality. But those two things are incompatible because faith is based in God's reality, and His reality is not based in the things that you can see, smell, taste, or touch. It's not based in your personal life experiences or in the things that you can even reason about. You see, God doesn't reason the same way that we reason because He has access to infinitely more information. His understanding of how things work compared to our understanding of how things work would be comparative to me sitting in my living room thinking about quantum physics and an ant in my backyard thinking about how it's going to go get food, except we're the ant. What this means is that when we come to faith, we're not adding God to our existing understanding. We're replacing our existing understanding with God, and that's called faith. That's why Jesus can say, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, or what you're going to wear, but instead seek first the kingdom of heaven. You can't say that from a natural perspective. That it's not possible, because from a natural perspective, to say I'm going to seek first something that I cannot see, smell, taste, or touch, something that I have absolutely no frame of reference for, and I'm going to prioritize that over the things that keep me alive, food, shelter, clothing, and somehow trust that by seeking this other thing, that's going to settle those matters. By prioritizing this thing we call God, this thing we call the kingdom of heaven, is somehow going to resolve the physical needs that I have right now, going to put food in my belly right now, going to keep me alive on this planet right now. In any other context, that would be insane. I mean, just process this for a moment. If someone came to me and said, I've encountered this divine being out in the desert, and he told me that if I will seek first his kingdom, instead of worrying about all the natural concerns that I have, staying alive, if I'll do that, then he's going to magically supply me with everything that I need. Even as Christians, we would call that person insane. Now, we would call them insane because of the fact that we believe that God is the truth and we've hopefully experienced His power, which has demonstrated to us that this thing that we are seeking is actually real. But therein lies the most important part. It's only not crazy if it's true. And this is why walking by faith can feel like you're losing your mind, because you are. Essentially, what we're doing with this thing that we call walking by faith is we are replacing the mechanism by which we reason about the world. Or another way you could put it, we're replacing the thing that we previously relied on to meet all of our needs with something else. See, before you met Jesus, you relied 100% on your own mind, your own brain, to be able to acquire everything that you need. If you're hungry, you use your mind to figure out how to go out and get a job so that you have money so that you can buy food, right? You use your mind to do all of these things. If you're looking for pleasure, you use your mind to reason about how can I go out and I can get the pleasure that I'm looking for. If you need to choose a mate, you use your mind to figure that out. In fact, a lot of people, they choose their religion using their own mind. But when we come to Christ, it's no longer our mind that we rely on for the things that we need. It's faith. And what is faith? Faith is believing that God already has everything sorted out, and the only thing that we need to do is hear and follow. Now, I can already hear my comments section going off with people citing the scripture of the people that were sitting on the rooftop praying and waiting for Jesus to come back, and Paul saying, well, if you don't work, then you don't eat. But you have to remember, to get to the place where that correction could even happen, you had to start with somebody already being willing to stake their life on Jesus actually being who he said he was. I can't tell you how many believers I see out there that are so quick to call people out for being too spiritual. In fact, being so spiritually minded that they're of no earthly good. But I promise you, Jesus would take someone who is ignorantly relying on him over someone who is confidently relying on themselves any day of the week. Now, the obvious next question is, what does this actually look like in application? How do we walk at this level of faith? And the truth is that it's going to look different for everybody, but the process is the same. God doesn't ask us to trust him in a greater measure than he has given us the ability to trust him. Let me give you an example. When God called Moses to go to Pharaoh, he showed up in a burning bush, had a whole argument with him, allowed him to take Aaron with him, and then sent him after demonstrating the staff turning into a snake and a withered hand and just all kinds of other miracles to affirm that he really was dealing with God. The magnitude of the thing that he was being called to do was attended by the necessary miracles and the necessary demonstrations of power for Moses to feel confident that he really was indeed being called by God to go do this thing. Joseph, on the other hand, also had a massive calling. But the difference is that the way that God developed his faith was more incremental. He started out in a pit, thought he was going to die there. Then his brothers end up pulling him out. That's the first act where it's like, okay, God is actually going to protect me. Gets sold into slavery, is in Potiphar's house for a time. God gives him supernatural favor. And then the whole bottom falls out and he ends up back in the prison. But then what happens? In the prison, God gives him favor, right? And so through every single step, there was an incremental building of Daniel's faith to the exact moment where the confidence to say to the king that this is exactly what your dream means, knowing what just happened to the last two guys who interpreted it incorrectly. I think people sleep on that sometimes. And not only that, but he was literally basing the future of the entire country on him being right about the interpretation of a dream. I mean, can you imagine what the king would have done to him if he was wrong? But again, what we have to remember here is that God built the faith to prepare him for that moment over the course of his entire life. And the reality is that the vast majority of believers will likely have a life that looks more like a Joseph, where God takes them through a series of processes, a series of smaller acts saying, trust me in this small thing and let me show you who I am. Let me show you that I'm reliable so that you're prepared to trust me in the bigger thing when we get there. That will be the way that the vast majority of believers, I personally believe, will experience this faith-building process. Most people are not going to experience a Paul moment or a Moses moment. Some will. There are some that God will call at a specific moment, and he needs them to be ready right then. And for those people, there will be a very different experience of God showing up and demonstrating his power because it's necessary for them to step into the walk that they need to step into. But I think the problem is that a lot of believers end up in one of two camps here. They either all think that they are Paul, or they all think that they're Moses. And so they go out and they start trying to act in a level of faith that is beyond what they actually have been given, the grace that they have been given to have that level of faith. Or they go the opposite direction, which is it's faith in the mundane. Trusting God isn't about trusting him for these big miracles or these big things. Trusting God is about, being faithful in the daily, being faithful in the mundane. That's what it is. But the reality is it's not one or the other, and it's also not both. It's sequential. Every single believer, the goal is to reach the standard of trust set by the Messiah. And what was that standard of trust? That standard of trust was having so much confidence in the Lord that he was prepared to endure and face the cross. Or put another way, he believed God so much, he not only was willing to bet his life on it, he was willing to bet his soul on it. See, the faith in the extreme and the faith in the mundane are part of the same sequence. The objective is to bring a believer to the standard of maturity set by the Messiah. That's the goal. We all have the same end result that we're being brought towards, but not everyone is going to start at the same place in that sequence. That's why Paul says, let each person use their gifts to the measure of grace or the measure of trust, depending on what translation you're reading, that you've been given. So what does that mean? That means that you should be living your life by faith to the absolute maximum measure that you have been granted. You shouldn't be using just a small amount. You should be using 100%. Why? Because the purpose of this whole entire thing is to replace our operating system with faith. And here's the thing. It's not that God expects this from you. It's that he wants this for you. Because every part of your life that is still based in human reasoning is not free. This is the part where someone might want to argue with me and say, well, no, of course it is. That's the part of me that is still free, that hasn't yet been enslaved to Christ. See, what you don't understand is that before you came to Christ, you were already a slave. You were just a slave to the conglomeration of personal experiences, biological processes, and perspectives that you've developed over the course of your life. I mean, why do you think psychology works? Because the patterns are real, they're observable, and if you understand a person's patterns, then you can understand how they're going to behave. Whereas a person that lives by the Spirit, as Jesus told Nicodemus, is like the wind. No one knows where it's going to come from. No one knows where it's going. Why? Because it's not following a human pattern, which is yet another reason why living by faith sometimes can honestly make you feel insane. Because when you're looking at the way that you're trying to live and you're trying to reconcile it with the way that you formerly lived and things aren't adding up or making sense, you're looking for the pattern. You're looking for the human pattern. But the thing is that God's patterns don't reveal their purpose until after they've already been played out. Because in following God, we're learning a different kind of logic. We're learning a spiritual logic, a spiritual patterning, not a natural patterning. And that's completely foreign to any other pattern that we have ever experienced in this life. God's patterns don't match any human patterns. And any human patterns that we have today that seem to correlate to God's patterns, it's because those are the patterns that have already been revealed. Think about how basically every hero story post-Jesus follows the Christ pattern. But if you look at ancient writing prior to that, there was no writing where the hero sacrificed themselves for everyone. I know I rambled a bit on that one, so I'll leave you with this. God would rather you make a fool of yourself trying to live by faith than a Pharisee of yourself living under a false pretense of understanding.